So next up is a panelist conversation that Gedge will be moderating. So I'm just going to leave it off to him and just...
We're starting our panel today on remote versus non-remote. And on this panel, we're having Lisette Sunderland, Jim SZAFRANSKI, and Scott Hanselman. We're going to talk about remote and non-remote work, which is a very relevant topic today. I'll be facilitating this panel, but on to our panelist introduction, the people who we're here for. And let's start with Lisette.
Oh, all right. So I'm Lisette Sutherland. I'm an American, as you can hear, but I've been in the Netherlands for the last 12 years. And I run a company called Collaboration Superpowers, and we help people work better together remotely through lots of free resources and online workshops, online interactive workshops. So not like courses that you take, video courses. That's the short of it. Yeah, I'll keep it super short.
And then over to Jim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim SZAFRANSKI. I'm the CEO at Prezi. As many of you may have know about us, and remote work is certainly something that our tool has always been used in as a presentation tool, and virtual conferences and face-to-face conferences. So we've been in this area and even have some new products in this area lately. So I personally am in the Bay Area. We have a team here, but we have the majority of our team in Europe. So lots of organizational and internal experiences here at Prezi and earlier in my career on things like remote work.
Fantastic. And Scott?
My name is Scott Hanselman. I've worked remotely for Microsoft for almost 15 years here in Portland, Oregon, and I also manage a remote team. I'm one of the few teams at Microsoft where everyone is already remote, the developer division, and I've got folks across multiple zones. Recently on my blog, I've been exploring the concept of remote work being different from quarantine work and the importance for separating those two.
Amazing, and we're definitely going to touch on that as well. But to kick things off a little bit, all of you have different experiences regarding with remote. I think one thing that we all share, obviously, is the current remote setup, but some of you have been remote for longer or shorter. Can we start with a story about your relationship with remote work and maybe highlight with a low light? And Lisette, if you could kick off, I know we have a bunch of these, but just choosing one.
So I would say, so my journey with remote started, I was living in the Bay Area about 20 years ago, and there was a guy that I used to hike with, and he wanted to solve the problem of aging. So in other words, he didn't want to die. And he thought that if he could just get the right people working together, the right longevity scientists sharing data, that he could solve the problem of aging. And so he set off to build an online project management tool. And 20 years ago, there's like hundreds of those now, but 20 years ago, they were few and far between. And but for me, the concept was so mind-blowing that I thought, oh my God, he's trying to solve aging. What else could we do if we just got the right people together? And so down the rabbit hole I went, and working for him, so this is sort of a side story, but one of the big benefits that happened to me early on was my favorite band in the whole world. I'm a big fan of music, but my favorite band in the whole world since I was like 15 years old called me. It's another long story. And they wanted me to go on tour with them. And I had just gotten this job with the guy that wanted to end aging. And it was my favorite job. And so I said to him, I said, there's no way I'm going to say no to this band. They've been my favorite band since, my whole life. I've got to go on tour. And he said, no problem. Here's a mobile router. Make sure you get your work done, have a really good time. And so for years, I worked from a van all over the world with a mobile router. And, by day, I was working with my team using this online project management tool. And by night, I was playing rock star merchandiser for my favorite band. And it was just the time of my life. And that's when I thought, oh my God, think of the possibilities, not only for companies, but also for individuals to be able to design their own lifestyles around the things that they love to do. And so for me, from then on, it was sort of, I was on a mission to offer this to others, because who could go back? So that's sort of my beginning down that path. But
it sounded like you were a nomad before nomad was even a thing.
I think nomads were a thing back then, but indeed it was unusual. I mean, having a mobile router 20 years ago was very unusual, and credits to my boss at that time for being so tech savvy. And for letting me do it, for having the faith and letting me do it at all.
Awesome. And yes, it sounds like you started super early, and it's awesome how you went on to help others do the same thing. And then Scott, you mentioned you've been remote for a very long time. How did this start and how did it evolve?
Pardon me, I was muted. Thank you, Lisette. Oh, that's cool. Hold that up again for us, please.
That's my.
Oh, I got to get one of those. See,
I'll send you one.
Those are the tips, my friends. Those are the tips the remote workers, the real remote workers have. She had that, you know what I mean? This is boom, like that. That was lovely. Thank you. I have been remote in Portland my life, and it is because I am a native Portlander. One of the things that you'll know about people from Portland is that we don't want you to move here. We don't want to leave. So when I was offered a job in Seattle at Microsoft, I thought that was wonderful. Wow, I get to work for Microsoft, but I don't want to go to Seattle. I don't want to deal with any traffic. I don't want to drive up there. How do you get, Lizette's point, your dream job, but your entire family has lived in Portland for 100 years, and your parents are here, and your brothers are here, and your nieces and nephews are here? So I insisted, well, I can do it remote. And through a series of blessings and privileges, they said, well, job is kind of insular, so we'll let you have this thing. And then over years, the other remote workers started to work for me, and then I became this little bastion of remote work, while all the while saying, we should all be remote. And then the Rona happened. And now, while I am very sad that we're all working remotely, I do have to admit to having just a bit of vindication that I was like, I knew it would work.
Yeah, it is very interesting how the world is changing. And it's also very interesting how people who have been doing this for a while, I think a lot of us are flocking to those people to advise. Do you see people coming to you asking you, how should we deal with this thing? Because you've been, you seem like an expert. Is that a thing?
Well, I'm sure that all of us on the panel here, including Lisette, given her book, are being called. Like everyone's like, oh, Lisette will know what's going on. People will call me and go, hey, Hanselman, you know what this is all like. And it's like, I don't have any idea how to deal with this. Like, if you want to talk about how to work remotely from Starbucks, I can tell you all about what that's like, but I can't go to Starbucks right now. So what's it like to work remotely from a tiny little prison in your house? That's a different conversation that I can have than tips for remote work.
Awesome. And then Jim, your story is quite different to Scott and Lisette on the panel. How has your story with remote been, and where is it right now?
Yeah, so I've moved between. I started my career as a consultant, so I got pretty good at working management consulting, pretty remote, but in very flexible situations, right? You were where the client was, and if you couldn't be there, you still were trying to be effective for that client wherever they were. And I've moved between full remote working out of my apartment in the Bay Area for East Coast based companies to hybrid sort of models, like where Prezi kind of is now, and things like that. So I've kind of moved between. I've been in an office, I've been remote, I've been a consultant moving between things. And so I've kind of seen it all. I would say in these models, starting with dial-up modems was one of the most exciting highlights of being a remote user in the 1990s, where you could actually get your email without going into the office. So, so my story's been back and forth. I will say a lot of my journey and interesting probably experiences with remote has been also trying to lead while remote. And I'll share a low light, actually. You'd ask for highlights or lowlights. And I think in the past, leading while remote's been pretty difficult because organizations really didn't know how to do remote all that well. And so a low light for me would be airplane rides, right? And so as a pretty remote person trying to lead, I think I hit 1,000,000 miles on United when I was like 35, right? And so I'm super encouraged about what we're doing in general with folks like Scott leading the way, but also what's being forced on us during this pandemic to make remote work a better experience.
I'm going to latch on that a little bit. I think that what you said, leading remotely, I'd love to hear the experience, Lisette and Scott, of you either leading or being led and how that worked with remote. Because I think we talk a lot about collaborating with your peers, but leadership might be a little bit different. Lisette, what is your experience there?
So I wouldn't say that I have I lead my own remote team with my own company, but that feels like different than being, somehow it feels different than being a leader. But for 7 years, I was the remote office manager for the Management 3.0 team, which was a global remote team. And and then with talking with leaders, what I would say is, one, you have to start with trust. So you have to, and that's in two levels. One, trust that it's possible to work remotely, and then build trust in your team. And there's, of course, different ways of building trust when we're remote. And to speak to that, I would say leaders need to think of remote as a new medium of working. And I like to make the analogy between radio and television. They're both broadcasting mediums, but you would design work for those mediums differently. The same is true with remote and in-person work. So I think that leaders need to recognize it's a new medium of work, and the way that we lead has to change. So one, we have to trust that it's possible to do this, and we have to build trust in our teams, but we also have to take the initiatives for how do we give feedback on our teams? How are we going to show appreciation? How do we build team agreements together? How do we align on the tools that we're going to use? So for me, leadership in person versus remote is kind of the same thing. I think as leaders, we need to set the goals and then get out of the way so that our teams can take us there. And then the job of the leader, to me, is to remove any impediment that's in the way. But I think that when we recognize that it's a new medium of work, that I think that we start to shift the conversation to what leadership means in the remote sphere. But before I talk too much, I'll hand it over to Scott or Jim.
I see Scott nodding a lot there.
I think that she's absolutely right on. Another way to say the same thing or look at it from a different angle is that the person on the remote, if you're just one of one or two remote people, that you are a differently abled person on the team. It's not a disability, it's not a formal piece of diversity, but if you have a team of 10 or 15 and then there's that remote person, you can pretend not to see it, just as you can say, I don't see color. And then by doing that, you're negating a person's experience. But the fact is, I'm not there. And then if you acknowledge that, hey, Scott's remote and this is interesting, or Nish is in India and we keep asking him to wake up at 3 a.m. to have meetings with us, is that really fair? Is the context in which the remote worker is in fair when everyone else is in the room? I didn't realize that they were projecting me on the wall. So I had a giant Wizard of Oz sized head. So when I would say something, it would be like, hey, I had a quick question. And then this giant Hanselman head would pop up 10 feet tall. And apparently it was like, and I actually talked to someone about it and they said, could you maybe just put me in a laptop in an actual chair? I would like to take up physical space at the table. I'll be smaller. My head won't be human-sized, but this is an accommodation that you could make, just as if you were making an accommodation for someone else who was differently abled. And that allowed me to change the context in which I interacted with people. And I felt like I was actually at the table.
I love the concept of differently abled. I have never thought of that this way. And Jim, we started from you on leadership, but obviously of this group, leading is one thing that you're doing professionally for quite a while. But what are some of the ways that you've dealt with this or seen what worked, what didn't work?
Yeah, I think I love what Lisette had said. I mean, the chair is amazing. I can't wait to put a laptop in the chair for that meeting. So I love that tip, Scott. And I really do have a feeling it probably worked. But I like Lisette. Lisette spoke for me in a way, which is, when you want to lead, you want to have the goals clear, right? And then you want to help people achieve them. And so, I'll be just super practical even here in the pandemic period. Two things I've been doing to just help do those two things. One is for instance, I do this a lot, but I have a Monday morning meeting every Monday morning, 8 a.m. with my team. I send them a video on Thursday of the meeting. I've already done the part where I talk is done on Thursday, right? And so that way, when we meet on Monday, we actually talk. The last thing I want to do is come into a Zoom conference, meeting and then just be a talking head. So that'd be like an example where you can, remotely now you can set goals. And I think and another thing that I've been doing is I block time on my calendar just to kind of get through Slack, all the forums, not just the direct messages to me, but all the important forums in the company. And things like that. And so those are ways I've been leading. And the getting through Slack is sort of is the getting obstacles out of the way, connecting people, right, trying to move things along. But I think just those two things, as Lisette teed up, are things I practice, and I think they help quite a bit.
Wow, the record the video to have a conversation, that's something completely new to me. And on the panel, have any of you seen this, done that, Scott?
We've started doing that with all hands, where we will have the prepared presentation or the prepared remarks by the VP ahead of time. They can be absorbed ahead of time, and they can be thought about, digested, and then the meeting is a conversation. Otherwise, you're just watching Netflix at work, where Netflix is your boss talking at you. And I think another thing to think about, the way that Jim phrased that, is he's changing the power dynamic from, here we're going to talk to, Jim's going to talk at us, and he's leveling things and being accommodating to his team. So we can now talk to our boss for all the same. Where
I love this, because one of the things that I teach is, because one of the things that happened when everybody went remote suddenly during COVID is that we tried to translate what we were doing in the office, and we tried to do it online. And what it ended up with is endless online meetings, right? Like Zoom fatigue is a real thing now before, and virtual fatigue has always been a thing, but now we're sort of overdoing it in 2D. And one of the keys to this new medium, I feel, is learning how to be more asynchronous and to use our valuable synchronous time together online for the things that we really need. So Jim's example of, if I'm going to just give a presentation in a meeting, why don't I record that before the meeting starts? Everybody can watch it on their own time, think about it, digest the information, think of course, the questions, process things, and then we use our valuable online time for discussions and decision making. So this, I feel like, in this new remote medium, one of the key skills people need to learn is, how do we go more asynchronous and work better together in this way? So yeah, I think I'm a heavy user of Loom, which is like a Google Chrome plugin where you can record your screen with a little picture. And like with my web developer and people that I work with where things are really visual, that's a much better way of giving feedback than typing out a big long email with like, oh, this pixel needs to go here. Instead, I can just show my screen and say, oh, I want this in blue and this should be green. And they kind of know the sentiment behind it. So we've got to sort of go a little bit less from text stuff to more video interaction, and also more asynchronous, because it's not sustainable. I feel what we're doing now, all these meetings all the time, it's just not sustainable. We're burning out, and I think mental health is becoming a serious challenge. Not only because we're working during a pandemic, which has its own stresses, but also because we're just spending way too much time in 2D, in my opinion.
Yeah, if I could add something on that, like one of the things we saw when this kind of asynchronous communications. So Prezi, we have about 80 million students and teachers using our platform, and what we saw was teachers started. They went into this pandemic, and all of a sudden they were holding up their flip charts next to them and doing this, right? And then we saw they do what's called a flipped classroom, where you actually do all the lectures asynchronous. Like, don't use the classroom time for the lecture. Use the classroom time, as kind of Scott said, to kind of level the field and work together, right? And so we watched our teachers do this, and it's just so amazing what they're doing. And so that's allowed us to bring in some of these tools. And I will say one other thing that I'd show you. You mentioned Loom. Scott, I would say that the Netflix for work, you can actually do pretty well. There are tools. I think Lisette mentioned Loom. I think we use one of our own, for instance, like this, right? And I think a lot of what we're talking about is there's a ton of flexibility, right, that virtual work provides, and a lot of asynchronous communication skills we're developing, right? But then there's the negative too. But what I wanted to show is, like, what we're seeing is we use our tool, Prezi Video, for these types of meetings. What we're seeing is actually the when you go on that Netflix, or you could call it Twitch for presentations. What we're seeing now is feature asks of, can I get the 3x or 4x speed? So everyone at Prezi is now great at watching a video in 2x. But these little gains of productivity go a long way. So I think it's just fascinating what people are innovating on, right, to make meetings better right now.
I think it's really special that while you were showing that, Lisette had her card that said awesome. So rather than waiting for a tool to give you reactions and, oh gosh, I really wish that Microsoft Teams would have a clapping button or whatever, she has an analog for that works in any system. It seems like as we are waiting for product teams to ship, there's a ability to do that in both ways. And I love that we're in Zoom and you're using Prezi Video to do that kind of work as well. That kind of stuff, I think, will go from being a techie thing or a clever thing to being something that everyone can do.
Yeah,
I was
actually, when Lisette held up her card, it made me feel like, energized.
Validation.
Me.
Yeah, validating. I was talking with Dr. David Kellerman at the University of New South Wales, and he has a video set up where he's got a giant touchscreen television, and he can sit there and talk and give his lectures in this wonderful experience with multiple cameras, and it's extremely comfortable to be able to do that. And he says just being able to stand up again makes him feel like a better teacher. And I'm trying to figure out how can I walk around this space and make it a valuable experience. And I feel now, like with tools like Prezi Zoom, or whether it be a card that I hold up or some fancy camera switching like we're now able to do, that's going to make my remote experience just that much better.
I have one of my facilitators actually has a flip chart behind him, and he will just draw on the flip chart. He's got a great side, good microphone flip chart. And I love the mix of physical and virtual tools. I think it engages our brains differently and just sort of, it might be small, but I think all of these little tips, the devil's in the details with remote work. Like, it's not rocket science, but there's 100 little things that you have to think about that you might not normally think about. And they all add up to make for a great experience.
And this leads
right behind me, I have my can of WoW. It's kind of like your awesome card, right? Yeah, so...
I love
looking. I'm looking around here for what I can hold up. I don't have any stuff.
This actually leads what you said, that the devil is in the details and remote is made up with a bunch of different things. I'd like to ask all of you, and we'll start with Scott, with how you think about remote and what are the dimensions that you think about. What is the important stuff? What do you think we should pay attention? Especially we have a lot of people on the call here or on this presentation who are relatively new to remote, similar to myself. I didn't do too much of it, so I'm actually just taking all of this in. When you talk with folks like this, what is your thinking and the way you go through this?
Well, I will want to defer to Lisette because she has written the book on this. But the three things that I think about are kind of the technical, the tactical, and the emotional. I think that in the technical world of engineers, I would have to say that I and others like me tend to be wired to try to solve problems with, well, I guess I'm going to need more cameras and a better light. And I need the ability to change the light in my office because I'm not going to be an effective communicator without that. But I would never have thought of holding a card up. And now I'm like, that's a way better. And it would have involved way fewer light, a lot less lighting and paperwork and all these kinds of things. What is going on there is I'm thinking about the tactical and the technical, but Lisette is thinking about the empathetic and the emotional relationship with connecting to the person on the other side of the screen. And when a leader does that, like Jim is doing, that normalizes being remote. When a leader allows their kid to come and sit on their lap in the middle of a talk, that sends a message, explicit or otherwise, that it's okay that we're doing this and you should feel welcome.
So for me, what I think about in terms of remote is also infrastructure is incredibly important. And infrastructure in two ways. One, for infrastructure for yourself, because of course we're when you're on camera, you have to think about things you might not normally think about, which is like lighting and your background and some other things. But then infrastructure also in terms of clearly hybrid is going to be the future for the foreseeable future, where some people are going to be at home, some people are going to be at the office, depending on how lockdowns go. And even when lockdowns are lifted, some people don't want to go back to the office. So what I'm seeing, at least in my world, is that hybrid is the future. And in that case, we need to upgrade the infrastructure at offices so that they can accommodate the hybrid way of working. Our conference rooms need to be set up so that remote participants are present in the room, although not big Wizard of Oz figures on the wall. That is really awkward for everybody, I think, but in a more human way. So I think that there's a lot of office restructuring that's going to be going on. But then I would say my other two things on top of that is, one, I really feel that remote teams need to create team agreements together on how we're going to work, because we all have our own individual preferences. And now that you can work all day, like, what are the core hours that you're going to work? What are the security protocols we need to be paying attention to? How do we know what each other are doing? All of those things to really create an agreement together for how we're going to move forward takes away a lot of the basic misunderstandings. There's going to be plenty more. There's always plenty more, but you want to get the easy stuff out of the way. And then I would say the last focus that I like to think of is team building, because how do we continue that camaraderie online? And in the past, I always advise people, like, get together every once in a while in person, have a big bowl of nachos and a couple of beers together, and it goes a long way. But now that we can't do that for the foreseeable future, like, what are the ways that we can create more presence and have fun online without burning out? So those are sort of the three areas where I'm focusing. I mean, there's lots more, but those are sort of my three.
And Jim, how do you think about this?
Well, I think what I would add, I think Scott and Lisette shared great stuff and plenty. I'd add one more thing, which I think is, it isn't going to be a new skill for managers to be able to facilitate this conversation, facilitate this meeting, as Lisette said, if it's half in the room, half out of the room, or we're all on Zoom. And so I think it's just really important for managers, which this is a leadership conference, like, you gotta practice and be thoughtful about facilitating a meeting now, right? Like, what are you gonna do in the first 5 minutes? Right, and probably different meetings need a different first 5 minutes. Some you may just jump right in because it's a 20-minute meeting, or some you might need to soften it up because you're about to go through something hard, right? And so I would just consciously facilitate. I don't, Lisette, I don't know if you've got that book ready, but there's so much skill in now facilitating this virtual experience. I just encourage people to be thoughtful about it, and make sure if I had one tip, just make sure everyone talks in the first 15 minutes. I know, Scott, maybe some of the engineering teams it's harder, but you don't want bystanders in these meetings, and I think that just really brings out the negative of the virtual meeting and the Zoom fatigue. So. But I think that'd be the main thing I would add to this. Just get good at facilitating, and we're all figuring it out. So but my one tip: have everyone talk right away.
And on that, Lisette or Scott, do either of you have suggestions on how facilitating works for you, how you learned it, what resources you could recommend to people here? Because we do have, again, a lot of people are leaders or in leadership setting, and I don't think any of us have it figured out. So, Jim, you said learn to facilitate. It's a bit of a broad stroke, because I would now struggle. So looking at because both of you, Lisette and Scott, are more experts on this. So Lisette, do you have some suggestions here?
I agree with Jim in that online meeting facilitation is a crucial skill to learn, for sure. In person, we got away with being sloppy in person because you can make up for a lot because you're physically with each other. But online, it's just ending up in really long, rambling meetings. And I think Atlassian came out with a report a little while ago that said in order for people to consider your meetings to be good, they have to start on time, end on time, and have an agenda. And if they have only those three things, people will think that it's a good meeting. And I thought, well, that's a low bar. I think we can do a little bit better than that, right? But it's a kind of amazing how many meetings don't have an agenda when you show up. We just show up and talk. So then I would say agenda is really important. And then I worked for a company once where there were no meetings allowed. And so when you wanted to have a meeting, you had to convince people to come. So I would have to say like, okay, I really need to think through this thing. Like, Jim, I need you there because you're the only one that knows the information from this particular customer. And Scott, I need you there because nobody else knows how to run the tech. So like so I would have to convince people to come to my meeting. And that actually helped set purpose and intention. So it's just a different way of thinking about it. But we could do way better in meetings. And in terms of where to learn about it, there's all kinds of workshops on how to facilitate online. And so I would tell people like, go get that skill, because the better you are at that, the better your companies will run, everything.
Yeah, I would add to that the resources are there. They do need to be kind of either updated or applied to this kind of new context. But the idea of listening intently, of deliberate practice, not just letting meetings happen by default, those concepts still apply even in Zoom world. I would respectfully offer my podcast, as I've had a number of people on the show talking about remote work, the Holloway Guide for Remote, all folks that have led teams all over the world in remote work. Lisette has, of course, written a great book on working together anywhere. Hey. The books, the resources, the workshops are out there. But here's the thing. You have to actually do it. Intentionality is the thing. Otherwise, you're just going to show up on Zoom and you're going to talk at a square for a while, and you're going to wonder at the end of the day why you and your team all have headaches. You're snapping at each other because your lizard brain knows that this is weird. I'm in my house at 7 a.m. talking to myself, and the frontal part of my brain is trying to tell me that, like, no, there's really people here and we're having a whole great conversation with thousands of our leadership friends. But there's a part of my brain that realizes that that's wrong, and that causes fatigue. And the intentional understanding that that is a thing is step 0 when you want to lead an effective remote meeting.
And I'm a big fan of icebreakers for any meeting. And there's a number of reasons. One is it's a good tech check to make sure that everybody can be seen and heard. And then for the second is science shows that once you've spoken in a meeting, you're more likely to speak again. So even if it's just a silly question, you're like favorite food, favorite vacation spot, favorite color, and it doesn't even have to be silly stuff. It could be like, why are you here? What are you hoping to get out of this meeting? What expertise are you bringing to the table? You can keep it professional. But I really am a believer in icebreakers, just quick, something to just get everybody to speak at least once. And if it's a big group, break them out into smaller groups and bring people back together.
Very, very briefly, that makes me look back on meetings I had this week and wince, because I remember that there was a square and they were there and then they left. And even worse, if it was an underrepresented person, and I'm thinking to myself, this someone just showed up, got in a square and then left and didn't say a word for 30 minutes. What could I have done to make sure that I let their voice be heard? So thank you for that reminder.
Just since you say that, I want to just put in one more thing, and please stop me if I ramble too much, but there's this facilitation technique that I learned in the last few months from the Liberating Structures community called 1, 2, 4, all. And you begin with a 1-minute silent brainstorm, like about the question. So you think to yourself, then you pair people into 2s, and then you combine those pairs into 4s, and then you come back to the larger group to discuss as a group. And what that does is it helps amplify the quieter voices, because those quiet voices in pairs, they can speak they're what they need to say, and the louder voices will then amplify those ideas in the larger group. So there are all kinds of techniques like this that people can learn to facilitate better online. That just helps the online experience for everybody. So as you can see from everybody's comments, there's a wealth of information out there. And just like Scott said, you have to do it. It's like you can think about losing weight all you want, but unless you're eating less and moving more, it's just not going to happen, sadly, as I've been learning in quarantine. Mm-hmm.
I am getting a lot of food for thought on this one. It feels to me that we just need to relearn how to facilitate meetings. And as you said, I think it was Lisette on how we could get away with being sloppy and make up for a bunch of stuff, even in the hybrid world potentially. So there it is. But one thing that I think a lot of us are curious about is hybrid is going to come back. Let's hope. Vaccine is here. Things are looking a lot more rosy, and the future of remote will change again to going back a little bit from this extreme remote, or as Scott, you had a term for it, Scott, a bit better than I had. But what do all of you expect on how, what things will be here to stay or sped up, but what things will be removed? And I'm really curious to hear what, Jim, you have to think, given that, like both the environment you worked originally wasn't fully in the sense, and what do you expect?
Yeah. And so for me, I'm going to attack this one pretty high level, and maybe we can bring it down. But I think as we go back, I'm super optimistic. And not just because we get to hug each other again, right? But what I'm seeing, like when you're remote, and you have this flexibility that we've now created, and then you have, as Lisette just talked about, like you've learned to include, and Scott, you've learned to help include the voices that maybe aren't included. Like the amount of talent and diversity that we're going to be able to bring in, we have a lot of it already. But you're going to, making everyone's voice heard, you're going to increase the diversity of the conversations happening. And then if you're able to attract talent, like Prezi, we just hired someone in Africa 2 weeks ago, and we had some experience with him, and we really liked him before, and we were trying to figure out how to get him on the team. Right now it's easier. We've got the tools to do that. I think that talent and diversity will lead to long-term success, whatever type of organization we're building. Right, and so I'm super optimistic, and so that's why Lisette had said she's thinking hybrid is probably the standard. And I do think that hybrid will become the standard for innovative companies, but I'll leave it up here. It's really about the type of people you can attract and the voices you can surface, and I think we're learning so much on that. So that to me is the future. I mean, all these companies that the audience is trying to build are probably down here, right? And gosh, if we've just learned a way to be better at kind of innovation, and again, that leads to my optimism.
And just one really quick injection there, and this is kind of piggybacking on the back. I've worked at companies, I guess, similar to Prezi, who were mostly on site, the type of companies that didn't really look favorable remote. In your book, what would hybrid look like? Would it be a work a couple days in the office, work from home? Some people work permanently remote, that kind of stuff. What is it for you?
Yeah, so I'll share what we're doing at Prezi. So Prezi, before we were three strong hubs: San Francisco, Budapest, and Riga in Latvia. And so what we're doing now is, one, we've added another hub recently because it was good for the diversity and talent in Berlin. And so what we're going to do is we're going to allow employees to work permanently from home. We're going to allow people to relocate permanently, and we're going to keep hubs in those 4 locations. And so we're just in the process of rolling this out, and so we're going to accommodate the flexibility and that talent and diversity that we can get, and so we're going to start changing, because in some ways Prezi was extremely centrist to Budapest, given how much we meant to that community, and we were able to benefit from it. But now we're gonna still have Budapest be an important part of our company, and some of these other hubs too. So we're going to what we're calling virtual first. Everyone needs to be skilled to operate virtually. And we didn't invent this. I think Dropbox has a great blog on this. We read a lot of the Microsoft stuff on this too. But we're going to be virtual first, where you assume all the rituals, all the workflows start virtually, right? But then we'll keep the hubs where we have groups of people, because we're certainly also some of the easy creativity that offers, we'll take advantage of too.
If I may, I have a question. If the coronavirus hadn't happened, was there any other forcing function that would cause you to do that?
Yeah, so we were actually thinking hard about this already. We had a lot of success in bringing a team on in Berlin, and we were like, wow, that worked well. And then we also had a lot of success, and then we were building a tool, as I've shown a couple of times here, that helps bring the power of Prezi presentations into Slack and Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Right, and so we had started to see that collaboration was changing, and the workplace was changing, and that was forcing us to consider presentations needed to change. And so we'd had that kind of conversation even before the pandemic. Should we eat our dog food and really go all remote because we think we can help those employees and those companies that are embracing remote. And so this just accelerated it for us.
That's cool. I asked that question because as a longtime remote worker and a longtime remote advocate, I would have to say that I've brought a dozen or 2 dozen people to the table at various companies, and they've said, I want to work remote, and don't really hire remote. Like for the right person, they always say that for the right person, we'd be remote. And I feel like a lot of talent has been lost because of that. And then now that everyone's remote, again, I mentioned at the very beginning how I felt a little bit vindicated. I'm just kind of like, now you get it. Now you all get it. Like, see, we can actually do that. Like, I don't think it's for everyone. I know that there are people who don't want to work from home. They don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the emotional whatever. They just need to leave and go somewhere. That's cool. But it didn't need to be a niche, which I think it was for the longest time, where like 5% of people were remote. Now it could be 50.
Yeah, and I think for us, we probably saw that 278 of us did okay. I mean, and we built some skills, so I think that allowed us to lean in to that vision you would have had earlier.
Yeah, it seems like it's a lot about freedom, both for the individual and for the company now. Like the individual wants the freedom to choose when and where they're most productive, because sometimes it's at the office and we want to be with others, and sometimes it's at a coffee shop, or sometimes it's at home. It just depends. But I think there's also the freedom for the company to choose how remote they want to be. Right? Like I know like the CEO of Netflix has just famously said that when Corona's over, he wants to bring everybody back to the office. And he got a lot of kickback from that. And I also thought like, why? Like there's so many benefits. But I understand. I think like it's your company, that's your culture. And there's lots of people that don't want to work remote. So you'll attract the people that want to live in San Francisco, that don't want to work remote. And that, that's fine for that company. So I think the future is freedom. It's just that more people are going to want to have hybrid. More people you're going to always want choice. So I think the companies that can accommodate that choice are just going to be they're going to have superpowers over the companies that can't.
And one of the things that's interesting is that I've always believed, at least for the previous 10 or 15 years of working remotely, that remote workers have a sense of what I call remote worker low self-esteem, where we always feel very lucky and very privileged about being remote. And then therefore we work harder. We tend to work when the kids are asleep. We think on average, you put in like 2 to 3 hours more a day, simply because we're afraid that our bosses will call and go, what is it that you actually do here? I feel like remote workers just get that extra oomph. I've always wondered kind of like why, because we feel guilty that we're at the coffee shop and I can go to the mall and I can sit around and work like this. So I pull out of the bank that this is my privilege to do that, and then I put back extra work. And I think other people are now seeing that. But at the same time, there's that hyper-connected way of doing that low self-esteem of being remote and making sure that you're seen and you're working, then causes burnout. So it's a constant balance to be a remote worker, to be a productive worker, and then to be a flexible.
I love that you. Oh, sorry, please.
No, I could endlessly talk, so feel free to interrupt. I was just going to say that, and I've lost it. So Greg, I'll go back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, this is I guess one of the things when we're remote is the video lag and this difficulty of having. There's only 4 of us here, and we're already here. But I wanted to go back to you, Lisette, because one thing that Scott mentioned is remote workers can get burnout, etc. And one topic I'd like to explore is the last one here before we get to the Q&A is how can we spend less time on Zoom or video calls, whatnot. And Lisette, you started with this. You said we're spending too much time on 2D. I heard Scott refer to this as well. But I'd love to hear advice, things you see work right now or maybe would work in the future.
The low-hanging fruit, I feel, is to shorten all of your online meetings. If they're 1 hour, shorten them to 45, 50 minutes and make sure that there is a break in between. I know that sounds very simple, but right now people are going from back-to-back meetings and there's no break in between, or you're having a 3-hour conference call and there's no break. So one low-hanging fruit is really take breaks, and then during those breaks, don't be on a screen. And that's a self-discipline thing, right? Like we're in between meetings, we're checking emails, we're on Twitter, we're doing something, and then we're going back into meetings. And at the end of the day, we're watching Netflix and YouTube. And so it's kind of a self-discipline thing. So one, taking breaks. When you take breaks with movement and get outside if possible. And then the thing that I've done personally for myself, because it started to become really too much, especially in the Corona days, is I just had to find a hobby that wasn't screen related. So I just picked up embroidery of all things. Like I just thought, I needed something, and I just thought, okay, I'm going to try this, and I'm sewing new couch covers. Like I'm forcing myself to do things that don't require screens in the evening. And it was hard at first, and then now I'm getting the hang of it. Like, I close my office door at the end of the day, and then I go downstairs, and I'm just not allowed to look at my screen until I've done something in 3D.
What is working for you, Scott, on reducing screen time, either now in Corona or even just general?
Our vice president for the developer division where I work at Microsoft, Amanda Silver, started taking meetings while walking. So she would start the meeting, and you would see her walking, and it would be kind of awkward, and there'd be some motion there. She'd begin it by walking, and then she'd turn the camera off. So she's introduced to us that she's walking, and she's got her high quality headphones or AirPods or whatever, and she lets us know that she's doing that, and then she turns the camera off, and that again normalized that we can do that when appropriate, depending on the meeting context. But if it's a stand-up, why not, right? So we all started with, like, I've got an Apple Watch, and I'm trying to like close my rings, kind of like the Fitbit, and you want to like have your move and your stand and all these kind of things. So we're having like competitions and stuff. So I'm looking at my meetings, and I'm saying, of the 3 or 6 hours of meetings I have today, I can probably walk half of them, which means I could walk, 6 to 9 miles today that I wouldn't have done before. So there's an intentionality. Again, I've mentioned that deliberate practice that's happening more and more as we are now on this, what is this, 165th day of March of 2020, that we are trying to apply those things. So by her normalizing that, it's allowing to get us through this long March as we begin the long December.
Jim, what are your thoughts on this? Did you do some of these things? I love this normalizing coming from the top.
I love the walking meeting. I took over as CEO this July here at Prezi, and Peter Arvai, our previous CEO and co-founder, and him and I had been partners for 5 years on this, and we started it in March. Our one-on-ones every day was walking, and we shared with the whole company we were doing that, right? And we encouraged everyone else to find a walking one-on-one or something also. So I love that idea, yeah, the other thing for me, I guess, is part of all of this is many of us have kids at home, and so a good 3D break for me is to go check in on the kids and not be guilty, or and also just tell people I'm going to be 15 minutes late. I'm going to check in on my kids on this, and again, hopefully everyone feels free to do that, right? So, but I think that's probably my main 3D break with 2 kids about 12 feet away.
A good reminder why we're actually doing this.
Totally. And just to say, it is harder than it sounds to take these breaks. I mean, if, it sounds super easy, like, oh, just take a movement break. But how many of us are actually doing it? I think keeping boundaries for ourselves is something that I struggle with a lot.
Yeah, but I love that idea, the 15-minute meeting where you started this. Just, you have to have the discipline.
One silly technical thing that I did, I always look for technical things to try to solve the problem, is I bought I've got this fancy podcasting mic, but I bought a lavalier mic, and it literally just allowed me to switch. Like, I could plug the lavalier in right now, and then I could at least pace. So maybe not appropriate for a meeting of 100, but if I'm in a meeting with my team, I want to pace because that helps me think. Having that lavalier mic, and they're very inexpensive clip-on mics, was just a small thing, or a wireless headset, lets your AirPods, it changes your context, and you can't sleep all night, walk 20 feet, and then sit all day. So anything that would enable me to do that.
Awesome. And with that, we're going to go over to Q&A for the last 10 minutes. I know, Scott, you unfortunately have to leave. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
And also for sharing a bunch of the ideas. I think we've all gotten some good ideas from each other. I'm taking that mic idea, that Cavalier mic. We'll see if it works out as well.
All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Hi, Scott.
Thanks so much for being here. And we're going to we're going to finish off with the Q&A with Jim and Lisette. Let's start with the first question that a reader was more targeting to Scott, but I think we can handle with the remaining panelists, which is how let me see who wrote this. Just a second, so I get the name right. I forgot to write it down. Yes, this was from Roland. And the question was that COVID remote kind of worked because we had a relationship established. Now this person is seeing that these connections are fading and they're worrying about how this is going to go. What are your thoughts on this? Can we do something about this? Is hybrid going to be the answer? What do you think?
I'll jump in. Maybe Lisette can reinforce or add. We watch this one closely, and I think it's it's a good point. It was easy because we all had relationships and that could last. And so we use a tool to measure sort of employee sentiment and morale and things like that. And actually we saw that people were saying their peer relationships were slipping in our company. So what we did is we set a company goal. So company-wide goal, one of our 3 goals for the whole company, on par with our product release goal. And it was that we would do 30 events cross-team to connect each other. And then our directors and VPs and senior executives led 30 different events. And they had to be cross-functional. They were as simple as playing drawing games. Some were yoga, some were chai making, cooking. One was a presentation club, right? And so we just made it a goal that we had to invest in these cross-functional relationships at the company level. And we saw the results in the analytics on the sentiment score, and it moved it back up. So in some ways, it was that simple. I wish it was all going out to a pub or going out on a hike or doing some community service. But with that not available, the tools are still there. You have to be mindful about it.
Yeah, and I would say one of the big things is you have to be deliberate about team building when you're remote, because if you leave it to chance, chances are it's just going to fizzle. And so like the quiz nights, the virtual coffees, I had a company, they set up virtual lunches. So like every Wednesday at noon, you could just show up. Whoever was around would just show up and have lunch together. And then there's lots of apps out there. There's like Donut for Slack, which will pair you with a random person in the company that you haven't had much interaction with. So it randomly pairs you up with people just to encourage random interactions. And then there are some really fun tools out there. And I'd like to just share my screen just to show one really quickly, because it's a bit new on the market. These kind of virtual offices have been around for a long time, but I think that they actually do help. Let me just make sure I get the right screen. They really do help create presence at work. So right now, what you're looking at, this is a virtual office. So it's an office that you go to online, and people feel a little bit more together because you feel like your colleagues are with you, even though they're avatars in your virtual office. They're still accessible. You can still talk to them as if they were in the same room as you. And I think that these kind of tools help bring people a little bit closer together and keep that sense of camaraderie. But I think the biggest thing is being deliberate.
It's incredible how much tools we're seeing exploding, and how I would have personally dismissed a bunch of these as gimmicky 10 years ago or before we were part of this, all of it. Now I'm just thinking, I'd love to have that. That would just make my life so much easier. It's just crazy how much has changed.
It is amazing what's out there. And if you have an Oculus Quest, anybody out there, there are meeting softwares that you can actually use. You go into your virtual conference room, you sit at a table with others. It's spatial. You can hear who's to the right and left of you. You can pull up a Prezi in thin air, in virtual thin air, and show people the presentation and then throw it out. I mean, it's kind of amazing. But one caveat I'll put on that is it's not about the tool. I'm a tool junkie, so I get excited, and then everybody's like, oh, but the tools, and our company's not allowed to use these tools. I would say it's not about the tool, it's about the behavior that you're trying to emulate. And so when you're going out and looking at tools, what you need to be thinking about is what behavior are we trying to get people to do, and what tool will help us accomplish that? Because sometimes we just get overloaded with tools, right? We've got like 100 passwords now, each of us, for all the different things that we're logged into. So you also don't want to have tool overload. And you don't want to have it be entirely about the tech. We don't want to lose that human connection.
Awesome. So we covered this one. There's a related question to what we've talked about. Moid is asking, do you think managing remotely is different than managing non-remote? And do companies need to start establishing training programs for remote management? And later managers choose to be in a remote or in a team office. So it goes into a little bit more depth. I'd love to hear that. I'm not sure, Lisette, do you want to start? Or Jim, do you have thoughts on this?
Go ahead, Lisette.
I mean, I do think that leaders need to be trained. It's a new medium of work. It's a new way of working. And so, I think that whenever there's a new skill out there, that training is a great way to just improve ourselves. So yeah, I definitely think leaders need to go through that, because how we do things online is just slightly different than how we do it in person. And if you're like a leader, for instance, in an organization, and you're used to the annual performance review, remotely, that's just not going to work. Giving feedback once a year, first of all, I don't think it works in person to begin with. It's just not enough feedback. But I think remotely, it really doesn't work. We need to set up continuous feedback cycles so that we're always sort of improve. So we want to go towards that agile methodology of continuous improvement. And we can't really do that unless we've set up different kinds of feedback loops. So learning like what works remotely. How do you build trust? How do you show appreciation online? How do you facilitate online meetings? What do you do when there's conflict on your team? Like, how do you facilitate that? All of those skills, they're new in the remote world, and you don't solve them in the same way that you do in person. So I'm a big fan of training.
I love that answer. I'm going to put you on the spot, Jim. Are you thinking of investing in training? And if so, how do you think you're going to find or figure out what you need? Because it is pretty new, this one, right?
Yeah, we have a small learning and development team at Prezi, and we're gearing up. This kind of virtual first is a new idea for us that we've just started to roll out, and we are gearing up, like, sort of what will our curriculum be for 2021 to help our managers, and we have 2 or 3 people on a team that will be their year next year, right? Which is, how do we provide the right resources? And the one advice I'd have for the person who asked the question is, the thing that's really missing is the emotional side, right? And I think, and many times we avoid those emotional conversations even when we're in the office, but eventually they boil over, and you can tell when someone just needs to talk. But it's a little harder now remote, and so I would just encourage everybody, just have those more emotional check-ins weekly. It's not that hard to do either. Just ask them about something, about their weekend. Ask them about something about their kids. Ask them about their stress level. Just ask something, and you'll get the cues if someone wants to talk about something that's not about the project at hand. I think that's what managers need to really focus on right now, just the emotional support of your team.
Yeah, I
had
love
a
that.
boss 10 years ago. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I had a boss 10 years ago. He was in California and I was in the Netherlands. So we had a 9-hour time difference. And he used to call me on his way to work in the morning. So it'd be like 6:30 in the morning for him and 3:30 in the afternoon for me. And he would just call to check in and say hi. And I was weird at first because I was like, hey, boss, what do you need? And he was like, I'm just calling to say hi, make sure everything's okay. Some days everything was fine. I had nothing to say. And other days there was something that was kind of on my mind, but I wouldn't have reached out to him specifically to talk about this. But since he reached out, it was like, oh, we're on the phone anyway. I might as well just mention it. Over time, that turned into a real friendship because he was consistently calling just 2 or 3 times a week just to check in. Didn't have to talk if we didn't want to, but if there was something I could. And I went back to San Francisco in January to visit some friends and family there. And he was one of the persons that I visited because we had built such a connection over time that it became a friend. And 10 years later, we're still friends because of those phone calls. So I think Jim's tip on one-on-one, just checking in, crucial, especially in Corona time, because this is a weird time. It's been a weird year, and everybody's feeling the stress. Even those of us like myself, I'm in a luxury situation where I've got a big house, my own office, like a huge park nearby. Like I by all means, I am not suffering like other people out there. But it's important to check in on our team. I'm still feeling the stress of the pandemic, and if I'm feeling it, I think that other people are definitely feeling it. So I think caring for each other during this time is kind of a crucial thing.
Fantastic. We're at time, so thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you, Jim, Lisette, and of course, Scott as well. We do have a few questions that we couldn't answer. There's one important question, which is about salaries and how we think this might change. Jim and Lisette, if you have time in the chat just to type out something, that would be fantastic. But for now, I'm handing it over to the studio. And thanks so much. On the audience, can we give a round of applause virtually with in the chat to our speakers? And thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Really, really good talk. We're going to go right into a break. I want to show Jim and Scott, and we have another mug for Lisette. So they're participating. They're getting their mugs. We're going to be sending these to them.